There are lots of people out there teaching nurses how to start businesses, but the last thing you want to do is start a business that doesn't fit your lifestyle. In fact, one of the best benefits of owning your own business is the lifestyle freedom that it gives you. Today, we're going to talk with Amanda Guarniere on how she built a business that fits her lifestyle. Welcome to the Stay at Home Nurse Podcast. I'm your host, Deanna Cooper Gillingham. For over 25 years, I've strived to use my nurse credentials to find work that fit my lifestyle. Whether it was raising my 4 children and 3 fur babies, traveling the world, or moving to Mexico and living on the Caribbean Sea. Sometimes I succeeded and sometimes I failed, but I always learned from the experience. Now, I want to help you by sharing what worked and what didn't work. There are so many opportunities out there for nurses today. The Stay at Home Nurse Podcast will inspire and equip you to have a nursing career that is meaningful and supports your lifestyle. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Stay at Home Nurse Podcast. This week we have back with us a guest from previous episode 44, Nurse Resumes Made Easy, Amanda Guarniere. Did I pronounce it right?
Yes, you did.
Yay! Okay. So we wanted to have Amanda back because along with helping people with resumes, nurses with resumes, Amanda has designed a business for herself. And the business that she designed supports her lifestyle and her raising 3 beautiful daughters. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So we want to talk a little bit about that today. How did you did you make a decision to leave the bedside and start a business, or was this a side hustle? Tell us kind of how that thought process came along.
Sure. So it was initially a side hustle back after my twins were born. They're now 4.5. And after they were born, I had gone back to work. I was working full-time nights as an ER nurse practitioner. And it was a lot. First of all, it's a lot to work full-time nights. And it was a lot to work full-time nights with 2 little babies at home that were 4 months old. So from that point, I really started thinking about, could there be some sort of option for me to work from home and still use my talents and my knowledge of medicine and nursing? And so I was looking for a while for some sort of side hustle opportunity. I did some medical writing. I did some continuing ed course design, kind of dabbled in some freelance work before deciding to start the Resume RX business. And initially when I started, it was purely something on the side to support my income and also allow me to drop to part-time, which I did end up doing after I had paid off my student loans. So I was for a while working part-time and running this business part-time on the side. And that's how it was for about a year or more. I ended up getting pregnant with my 3rd baby at the end of 2018, going into 2019, which was really my first full year in business. And it was always going to be something that was on the side for me. So fast forward to when the baby was born, I took time off with the baby. And in January, so the baby was born in August of 2019. And in January of 2020, I was looking for a job and I decided that I was going to go back to work per diem. I had left my previous job because we had moved. I was going to go back to work per diem. I found a job, I signed a contract, and I was waiting for credentialing. And the plan was really for me to be mostly a stay-at-home mom who had a business and worked 1 day a week, maybe. And I found a job working at an emergency department outside of New York City. And by the time my credentialing came through, when they called me to say, everything's gone through and you can work, it was the first week of April. So it was the first week of April, 2020 in New York City. And if you don't remember what was going on then, it was the peak of New York City's coronavirus situation. So I had to make a very difficult decision in that moment I tried to delay. I delayed my employment for about a month or 2, thinking that we would have moved past the pandemic. Remember those early days when we thought that it would go away quickly, and ultimately it didn't. Right. So my kids weren't in school. School had been canceled. I had no babysitter anymore. My husband was working full time from our home. So I ultimately decided that there was no way for me to keep myself and my family safe if I were working in the emergency department. So I let the job go. I never started. I regretfully declined um, the position. And it was that was the decision that then put me full time in my business. So it wasn't so much a decision to go full time in the business as it was to step back from clinical practice. But it was ultimately, I think, a blessing in disguise, maybe. I don't know exactly what to call it, but 2020 was the year that I was able to work full time in my business. And it was really an explosive year for me business wise. And we're now into 2021 and I am still full time in my business. And that's kind of where we are right now. So it was definitely a circumstantial decision as opposed to one that was very intentional.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of really good points there. The first thing I want to kind of touch on is that you were going to have 3 children, so you're going to be a mother, and you have a spouse, so you'll be a wife and a mother, and then you were going to work part-time, and then you're going to have a side hustle. So I know the reason I kind of giggle at that is because I think we all think that, like, oh yeah, you keep spreading yourself and cutting yourself into these little slices of the pie, and everything gets thinner and thinner to the point where you really don't feel like you're doing anything well. So you had mentioned a blessing in disguise, and I think it probably was a blessing in disguise for you because you didn't have a choice then. You had to make the business work because that was going to be your contribution. So how did that kind of make you feel when you realized, wow, if I don't go back, then did you feel pressure that you had to reach a certain level with your business? How did all that transpire in your head?
I I had known even while I was still working that there was the potential behind this business that if I took it full time, that I could grow it to be something that far exceeded my nurse practitioner salary. I knew that I could match what I was doing. There were clues in what I had done so far in my business. And deep down, that's what I wanted for a long time. I was kind of looking for an excuse or looking to give myself permission to step away from my clinical practice to take the business full time. That's where my heart really was. But I struggled with that decision because I thought it would mean something about me as a nurse practitioner if I wasn't actually working as a nurse practitioner in the way that I was. So, it was a difficult decision and I didn't necessarily feel pressured because I knew already that, my business was successful enough that even if I had kept it where it was, financially as a family we would have been fine. But I kind of needed and wanted to prove to myself that whole idea that I had that if I took this business full time that I could out earn myself as a nurse practitioner. And that's what 2020 gave me the opportunity to do was to prove that theory. And I did prove that theory.
That's interesting. I talk to a lot of nurses that have a side hustle or a business. And one thing that I find very constant is we feel the guilt about not, are we really a nurse if we're not working at the bedside? Are we really a nurse if we're not directly impacting a patient? So how do you wrestle with that and what are your thoughts regarding that?
Yeah, it's something that I go back and forth with. It was a really difficult decision for me ultimately to. I knew that it was the right decision to step away when I did, but I really wrestled with the identity piece of it. And to some extent, I still do. I don't think that I've been away from clinical practice long enough to no longer call myself an NP. I have other ways of staying clinically relevant. But I also see how my impact right now is so much more amplified because of the work that I do. The work that I do helps nurses and nurse practitioners find and land fulfilling jobs and have an impact on their patients. So, for every one nurse or nurse practitioner that I'm helping in my business, that's having an exponential impact on on their patients. So it's a different type of fulfillment. But I do still kind of wrestle with the fact that at at some point, is there going to be that point where I'm no longer, a clinically competent NP, or will it just be the type of thing where if and when I want to go back, since I've had so much experience working, it will be just, the need to freshen up my skills and get back into the swing of things.
So is going back to working as an NP something that is on your radar right now, or is it just the if I ever decide I want to?
Yeah, it's more of an if I ever decide that I want to. If I'm being totally honest, I financially I'd be taking a pay cut if I took time away from my business and went back to clinical work. It would be hard to justify that financially, knowing that time away from my business would be, I wouldn't be able to match it with the work that I'd be doing. I think that for me, despite that, I will still want to work clinically in the somewhat near future. I personally want to wait until I and my whole family are vaccinated for the coronavirus. I'm, eager for that to happen because my specialty is in very high risk environments working in emergency medicine. And while I know my skills are needed and I can contribute to this situation, I also am making the conscious decision not to put myself and my family at risk, which means that I'll be able to help pick up the slack in the future when we are kind of improving and we're all vaccinated. So is it in the immediate future? Probably not, but will I probably either volunteer or take a very part-time or per diem role in the next 2 years or so? I would say probably.
Okay, I find that very interesting. And just hearing different people's stories is very interesting with that. So when you decided, when you said before that this resume RX wasn't the first thing that you were looking at. You had done some other things like some writing and some freelance writing, but you kind of took off with this and chose this as your business and what you wanted to do. What helped you to make that decision?
Yeah, so I was trying to figure out, I knew that I wanted to do some sort of service or some sort of writing initially because that made the most sense because of where I knew my strengths were. And it was after I saw a few posts from other people in different groups and things looking for resume advice that I realized that I had this very small skill set that was rare that other people wanted and needed access to. So that was my initial validation of the idea, was seeing people unsolicited asking for help with this problem. So I really started off small by offering my help for that problem to kind of see, was this something that I could do for other people? And so that's kind of how things started. I validated the idea. I made sure it was something that I could provide well and that other people would pay for, so that I knew that I had an actual business and not a hobby. And then as that took off, I realized that that still wasn't going to align with what I wanted for my lifestyle. We talked before we hit record about the trouble with trading your full-time hours for even more than full-time hours when you become a business owner and you haven't been intentional about what that business looks like. So when I realized that the more clients I took on, the more of my time I'd be unavailable for the things that were really important to me, that's when I had to be really intentional about how I was going to create and structure the business so that not all of my business revenue was tied to my time, because that's not what I wanted. My goal was to work as little as possible, whether it was, working in the hospital or even working on the business. I'm not at a point right now with the age of my kids that I have 8-hour days to dedicate to work. I work 3 hours a day at most. So I've had to create a business that fits into that.
I think you're talking about starting with the end in mind, which is something that we don't always think about. Sometimes we just like to see what falls into place and, what opportunities come to us. But sometimes you have to look instead at where you want to be and then filter out that opportunities. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not or experienced this, but one of the things that I've experienced is the more that I do, the more that I notice like all these more opportunities. Like at first you're like, what could I ever do to make money that didn't include trading time for dollars? And once you start to break that normal way of thinking, you start to see all kinds of opportunities. And then it almost gets addictive, like I could do this, or I could do this, or I could do this. And you keep getting all these other ideas, and you have more ideas than you could ever enact on. And sometimes it's really hard to just kind of pull back and say, okay, wait a minute, does this align with the lifestyle that I want, or am I just buying myself more work? Do you have it? You're shaking your head.
I know, I'm shaking my head.
So I'm going to let you go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. I sometimes joke that I feel cursed by all the ideas that pop into my head, whether it's related to my own business or ideas for starting other businesses or things that would make great business ideas. So I have to constantly rein it in. And, I call it putting it through my idea filter. So usually my idea filter is either time. So I'll write something down and then revisit it a week later and decide, okay, was this something that really needed to happen, or just a creative idea that doesn't need to be put into action? Or sometimes my husband is my idea filter, or I have a business bestie who is my other idea filter. So I usually make it a point of putting any ideas through the filter before putting anything into action. Otherwise, I will go down some rabbit holes and run away with ideas that haven't been fully thought out.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just coaching with somebody the other day, and she had brought, she wasn't sure what to do. And so I just let her talk. And as she's talking, it was at least 5 to 10 ideas that like you could make money doing this, and you can do this, and you can do this. And so we finally narrowed it down at the end of the conversation to 3 of the most, like let's just focus on 3 because we can't look at 10. And then I said, come back in a week. Don't decide, like sleep on it and see, okay, these 3, do any of them really excite me? Do I wake up in the morning and think, okay, yeah, and then does this give the lifestyle that I want? Is this where I want to be in 5 years? Because yes, when you start talking to people, you're like, oh, did you know you could do this? And it's not just, I think of them for myself, I think of them for other people. I see, yeah, it's like, and not everybody wants to hear all the great ideas you have. So I have to kind of rein it back yeah. So, but it's something that excites me because when you stop it, I had such a traditional way of thinking for so long. Like you get a job and you work and you go and you put your hours in and they reward you with a paycheck at the end. And I couldn't even the first time I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and he talked about the different ways, like of different types, like there's the job and then there's an entrepreneur who does a job. And I couldn't even think on the other side, on the right side of the 4 quadrants that he had. It didn't even occur to me. I was like, I don't understand what he means by that. I don't understand what he means by, and now that I understand, it's like everywhere I look, I'm like, oh, look, there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity. You're shaking your head again.
Yeah, no, it's funny. No, I definitely have experienced the same thing. And what's interesting is I think there are people, it comes down to, us having had this entrepreneurial awakening, maybe. And I find myself too thinking of all the ideas that other people could do. And sometimes I have to hold back and, not give my unsolicited advice. But, my husband is one of them. He has, a traditional kind of nonprofit, but corporate job. He works, regular traditional hours in exchange for a paycheck, and he values the security in that. Like that's really important to him. It feels secure to him to have that type of job, whereas that feels very stifling to me. Like that's one of the main reasons that I decided to go into entrepreneurship, was to have the flexibility to create my own schedule and have control over the hours I work, control over the money that I make. And it's just interesting how different people can just have very different values and motivators in that way. So having him, being able to understand his experience and his perspective has helped me realize not to push all my brilliant ideas on other people, because it's not what motivates everybody.
Right, right. And sometimes it's just a time thing too. Sometimes I think it's certain stages in your life you need maybe security at a certain point, and then you get to another point where maybe the freedom is more important to you.
Hmm.
And I always, when I hear the security, I used to think of that a job is security, but then I realized you have all your eggs in that one basket of
Yeah.
that one job, and you're relying on people that you have no control over. And when you're looking for a job, you're saying, pick me, pick me, pick me.
Hmm.
But when you're an entrepreneur, you're picking yourself and you're saying,
Yeah.
okay, I choose you to make the life that I want. And so I guess it's just a different way of looking at what makes you feel secure. Because for some people, knowing that they're getting that paycheck deposited every 2 weeks, that makes them feel secure. Where to other people, that would make them feel insecure that they only have one way of making money. Because a lot of us entrepreneurs, we have like multiple revenue streams. We don't have one product that we do or one thing that we do. We have multiple, because we see so many ideas and opportunities. We have multiple ways of making money. So when something like the pandemic hits and maybe one of your streams is knocked out, you still have these other ways, and you can focus more of your time on the other things that you do. Where if you were working at a job and that job said, we can't, if you're working at a restaurant, we can't be open right now, that's your one thing. But if you're doing something for yourself and you have multiple streams of income, you just pick up a new stream of income, or you just focus more on the other ones that you have.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And I think the reason I was so excited about talking about this is just because I think it opens the eyes to other possibilities. We're not saying this is the right possibility or the right thing for everybody, but I just think that sometimes we were never taught this in school. We were taught, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up? And if we even thought about, I don't know about you, but if I even thought about entrepreneurship, people would be like, why would people pay you to do that? And no, it's like, you have to get a job. You have to have somebody that's going to promise you a paycheck every 2 weeks. And so I just want to throw out there that if you have that entrepreneurial bug, if you're looking for more freedom and you value the things that we're talking about, that there are opportunities out there, and there are multiple opportunities out there. And it's not as insecure as people like to think. We're not as crazy as people think we are if we're quitting our jobs and going full time with a business.
Yeah, it's made it really interesting from the parenting side of things because, as you said, this is kind of what we're told from a young age. You grow up, you go to school, you maybe go to college or a vocational school, and you get a job, you work the job until you retire, and we ask little kids, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And so, hearing you say that reminds me of opportunities when I'm talking with my kids to not necessarily tell them that it has to be a certain way, but try to leave things open. But it's tough because we want our kids to be secure and successful, and part of that feels like sending them through the mainstream way of doing things. But
Right.
it's been an interesting kind of perspective shift of how can I potentially, foster creative kids or kids who want to have a different path than your very traditional, vocational path.
Yeah. I think one of the ways is like asking, how do you want to serve others when how do you see yourself serving others and providing value to the world? Because that's really what entrepreneurs do. We provide a needed service. And, my children are older than yours. They're not babies. And so I find it funny because I talk to my oldest son a lot about entrepreneurship. He sees what I'm doing, and he's like, wow. And I'm like, I know, I am so sorry. I never told you this was possible, but I honestly didn't know. I was the one saying, you have to go to school and you have to get good grades and you have to do this and trying to put him into a box that he was never made to be in. And now I'm like, no, you should not be doing that. I take my words back. I'm eating my words, and instead you should be doing this. You should be creating something, because even once you learn how to create a business and how to be, provide value, even if that thing goes away, there, how to do it now. The blueprint, and you can go out and do it in another way. So anyway, that's my my opinion or 2 cents with
Yeah.
that.
Well, you have to wonder how many of us became nurses because we heard this kind of traditional messaging of go to school, do well, choose a profession, and enter that profession. And I have to wonder if all of us nurse entrepreneurs um, were kind of pushed or nudged in that direction, either because of self-imposed expectations or messages we heard elsewhere, and through our discovery of entrepreneurship, we're really discovering what else we're really great at that we just never knew was an option when we were learning about what you become when you grow up. That's my theory behind all of us lovely nurse entrepreneurs who are really blazing some trails.
And I know sometimes I think, when I look at what was I meant to do, I feel like as a nurse, I was meant to help others. But as an entrepreneur, I'm meant to help others.
Mhm.
And, I still do a lot of the same things. I educated my patients about their treatment options. I did that as a nurse, I did that as a case manager, and now my I'm educating my followers. So you still do the same things and you're helping people to reach their goals. Like that was a big thing as a case manager, is helping our clients to reach their goals. Well, now I feel like I can do that in a different way by helping these nurses to reach their goals. So it's kind of when you look back on your life and you connect the dots of like, I've always been doing this. I've always been doing this, but just for different categories of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really great way to put it, and also a great exercise for someone who is maybe feeling a little bit lost in whatever career they're in right now, and maybe they feel a career pivot in their future, or maybe they feel the call to entrepreneurship and they're just not really sure what direction to go in. And it's kind of easier for us to say because we have the hindsight perspective, but look back on your life at what you were always doing, even as a little kid, even as a teenager. Like, who were you to other people? How were you showing up for others and contributing? And that's usually going to be a really good indicator of what you are going to be best at moving forward.
And I know there's probably a lot of nurses out there right now that maybe don't want to go back for very similar reasons as you have to the hospital right now, or maybe until there's a vaccine. And, 100%, if you need a job and you need that security and you need instant money, because entrepreneurship does not provide you with instant money. You will
That's true.
invest a lot of time and effort into it first. It's an investment. So you're investing your hours now and maybe even some of your money now so that you can get the reward at a later time. But if you actually need a job now and you need money now and you need security now, then you need a job. And so Amanda can help with that. She doesn't just do resumes. She also does coaching to help them to find the right job and to find where they can use their talents the best, and then helps them to get that job. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I think, you hit the nail on the head that while we can talk about dream jobs and dream futures, the reality is many of us have to take some stepping stones on the way. And yeah, the way that I like to help nurses and nurse practitioners is kind of in that immediate sense of, preparing your resume and cover letter, making sure that it reflects who you are as an applicant, but also giving tools and resources so that you can discover those pieces about yourself that will help you figure out what your dream goal is, regardless of whether it's a job or, entrepreneurship, and how can you kind of craft that, or curate that career and curate the path to that career, which may sound a little bit abstract, but essentially it's like stepping stones. How can you plan out the stepping stones from now into your goals so that you can kind of make that way confidently?
So if somebody is interested in taking you up on this offer, or wants to even just figure out what you offer and learn more about that, what would be the best way for them to connect with you?
So you can find me on Instagram at the Resume RX. That is the best social place to follow me. Lots of little infographics and bite-sized trainings and tips. My website is theresumerx.com. And I like to point podcast listeners to a particular page, theresumerx.com/help. And what that is it's kind of a one pager of all my trainings and different educational resources and templates, kind of all in one place. And you can choose your own adventure, so to speak, to see how exactly you need the most help.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us back again. I really appreciate you taking time away from your business and your three littles so that you can come and encourage and inspire and help those that are still on the path of trying to figure out, should I get a job? Should I be an entrepreneur? Do I want to be an entrepreneur? What's it really like?
It's my pleasure. We're all figuring it out together.
We are, yeah. So thank you again for taking your time away. And hopefully we'll get to maybe check back in with you in a little bit and see how your business is growing. I love to kind of get that time machine look at it. You know, I know a lot of people listen to podcasts and they binge, and they'll find you 5 years later and they'll go back and binge listen. And I think it will be very interesting. We're almost a year in, and probably we will be about a year in when this episode goes out, and it'll be interesting for people, I think 5 years from now, to go back and listen to and say, oh, that person, I just heard them last week, because they're binge listening, and then they can hear the progression, and we'll see if we're still talking about how much we enjoy entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I love that. We'll see.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Until next week, adios from beautiful Puerto Aventuras, Mexico.